This is Judaism Unbound, episode 24, BimBam. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rovis.
And we're here today continuing our Emergent Innovation series with Sarah Lefton, the executive director, producer, and founder of an organization called BimBam, which you may know as Godcast. They've recently been going through a name change. Sarah is one of my oldest friends in this business of Jewish innovation. We'll talk about that later as we go through her story. In addition to founding BimBam, she has been named one of the 50 most influential Jews by the Forward newspaper, is one of the recipients of the Joshua Venture Group Fellowship, which is a prestigious fellowship for Jewish social entrepreneurs. And in 2012, she received the Pomegranate Prize from the Covenant Foundation for Exceptional Young Jewish Educators. So we're really excited to have this conversation about BimBam and all of their works with new media. Sarah, thank you so much, and welcome to Judaism Unbound.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm enjoying listening to it, so fun.
Oh, that's great. We're very excited when we have listeners come on the podcast. I mean, this is definitely bringing back the old times for me, because I remember when you and I actually were just pretty much getting started in this business. I think it was probably around 8 or so years ago. We were at the Conversation, and I remember that you were going around showing the first video that you had ever made, which was the Torah portion about Balak and the talking donkey. And I remember you going around and showing that to everybody, and everybody was so blown away and excited, and that has turned into this entire empire.
Yeah, that was a really big couple of days for me. I was actually walking around that hotel with a laptop like a waiter, showing it to people. And thank God, because someone who saw it there made an introduction to my very first donor who made the series possible, and somebody else who was also there is now on our board. So it was an extremely formative experience.
To get started, could you tell us a little bit about what BimBam is and what it does, just for our listeners who may not be familiar with it?
Sure. We are a new media production company. We're based in San Francisco, and we do what a lot of production companies do. We make videos. Sometimes we make apps, sometimes we make audio pieces, but we make stuff. The stuff that we make happens to be about raising basic Jewish literacy. So we're best known for making animations, on the one hand, for adults who want to learn the basics of Judaism, whether that's about ritual, prayer, what Jews believe, or what's in the Torah. And then on the other side of things, for young families raising Jewish kids. And we have a series called Shaboom, which is about Jewish values. We have how-to kind of prarioke videos, if you will, and other things for that audience, kind of apps about baking challah and things like that.
Could you sort of give our listeners a quick primer on the pathway to how you got from that first little video of a talking donkey to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So I founded this organization, which most of you out there in podcast land probably heard of as Godcast, and we changed the name just about 6 months ago to BimBam. But basically, it's important to know that I came out of tech and new media and advertising and things like that, and was a recreational adult Jewish learner. I grew up with the very best mediocre Jewish education that a girl in South Carolina could get, which Dan knows all about, actually.
My wife is from the same town.
So anyway, I had an incredible, if mediocre, Jewish education, and it was very focused on identity and belonging and camp and community and Zionist folk songs and pride and cheers, and it was awesome. And that was it. And it wasn't until my 20s, when I was living in New York, that I ran into different kinds of Jews for the first time and felt that something was missing, that I was so connected to Judaism and suddenly felt there was no there that I didn't have any information. I was being invited to Shabbat dinners on the Upper West Side with Jews who grew up quite differently from me, whether they had gone through day school or had done, a year in Jerusalem or whatever it was. They knew things that I didn't know. And somebody asked me once if I wanted to share a few words of Torah at a dinner, and I was mortified. I didn't know what the Parsha was, And frankly, I didn't even know who any of the characters were if I had. And this was deeply embarrassing to me. So in my 20s, I embarked on this kind of solo adventure into Jewish learning, and I became kind of the littlest learner. And I was showing up to lots of Torah and Talmud and Hebrew adult education classes, largely in Manhattan, and finding myself the youngest person in the room by 30 or 40 years much of the time. This is before the great explosion in cool young adult Jewish experiences that now proliferate in Manhattan and elsewhere. So I was on this adult Jewish learning adventure, and at the same time was working in advertising during basically the birth and great flowering of the World Wide Web, and building websites for corporate clients, and doing quite a bit of video production and animation and this and that. And it just started cooking for me. Why isn't there this online for Judaism? In fact, there was very little online for Judaism at all. I think there were the flourishings of some Kiruv outreach websites, but really not much for the beginning learner like me. And this just seemed crazy to me as someone who made commercials for shampoo and cruise ships. Why weren't there commercials for Jewish ideas online? So the idea started to cook for me at that point.
So just to make sure that I'm understanding this right, essentially the way that you think of yourself at that time is as somebody who had a positive feeling towards Judaism, who saw themselves as someone who was Jewishly connected, but then when you moved from South Carolina to the big Jewish city of New York, you had a sense that the content of your Jewishness was insufficient to make you feel good about it in comparison to others that you were encountering, or was there sort of a different set of feelings involved as well?
There were two things involved. One was this feeling that I was deeply connected on this heart and this hands level, I guess, right? But there was no head there. I was very connected through community and feeling, but not a lot of knowledge. And as somebody who otherwise thinks of herself as fairly intellectually oriented, this was disappointing to me. How could I be such an overachiever in all these other ways? How could I be so well read, et cetera, and know so little about my own background? I continue to be mortified. I took a class in university called Myth onto Film, where we hand-painted films onto celluloid about myths. And I couldn't think of a story to tell. And ended up illustrating a Greek myth. And to the Sarah of just a few years later of that, it was incredibly embarrassing. How did I not have stories from my own tradition to refer back to? So that was going on. And the other thing that was going on was that I was surrounded by Jews. I moved to New York City. I was at NYU in graduate school. I was surrounded by not just Jews, but a lot of Israelis in my graduate program, and hanging out, as I said, on the Upper West Side with a Jewish community on Shabbat, really for the first time in my adult life. And I felt, frankly, less than, and that is not a way I like to feel. And, the conversation I happened to be around at that time was a pretty traditional Upper West Side, Shabbos table-centric, can somebody give a little drash-centric, let's talk about the Parsha kind of Judaism, and I wanted to be part of it. But I'm picking up all this Jewish information, and I want to share it with my friends, right? The people I grew up with. If only they knew what I was learning now, they would be as happy as I am. Well, I just have to kind of package it up and make it fun for people. It would be so cool if I made a website and if I made a video like I do for work about all this Jewish stuff. It would be so great. How has that not happened yet? And long story short, at a certain point, I said, well, I guess I got to do it because nobody else is going to.
Okay, so you're in this position where you're imagining that this has to exist, but it doesn't. So what do you do next?
Well, what I do next is get laid off from my job in advertising because it's the year 2000 and the economy is starting to tank and advertising follows the economy and everyone gets laid off. So I get laid off. I spend, 10 months hanging out around the Burning Man scene, traveling, partying, making art, and deciding to move to San Francisco. I get to San Francisco, and there is no work to be had in new media and technology, which is what I do. But I meet a guy who's on the board of a Jewish organization called Camp Tawanga, and next thing you know, I am the marketing director for Camp Tawanga. and I stayed there for 5 years. And while I worked at a Jewish summer camp...
We should point out that Camp Tawonga is a Jewish summer camp.
Oh, yeah.
It might not sound that way to certain people.
Right. Mm-hmm. It is affiliated with the JCCA movement, but it is a pretty independent camp, and you could not pin denomination on it or anything like that. It's an incredibly special place. What I got out of working at Camp Tawonga was a real understanding of the institutional Jewish world and how funding and philanthropy work. And while I was there, I did my first little experiment in Jewish entrepreneurship, which is I made some funny Jewish T-shirts that I put for sale online through a little business I called Jewish Fashion Conspiracy. And I started, kind of building a little following online of people who thought I was funny and were interested in what I had to say. And I got invited to the conversation as a result of those T-shirts. Godcast as a concept had been brewing for me for years before I actually made a piece. What happened was I think I hit a point where I was just so frustrated that the thing I wanted to exist didn't exist. And I went on a J-date with somebody who turned out to be an animator. And we didn't really have dating fuego, but I said to him, for a really long time I've wanted to make this animated Parsha HaShavua, Torah Portion of the Week video. I think it would be so cool, and I think people would really love it. Do you want to work on something like that together? And he said, sure. You have to pay me. And I was like, fine. And then I went the total, classic indie filmmaker route, right? I, sold my comic book collection. I didn't actually. I still have it. I paid him a few $100s, and we made what you can still see on our website. It's Parshat Balak, the story of the talking donkey. And I went over to my friend, Andy Shapiro-Katz. He is a rabbi and educator who is now living in Beersheba. Anyway, I went over to Andy's house and sat on his couch and with like a super cheap microphone just interviewed him about the Parsha and just kind of followed my intuition. Said, Andy, tell me what happens in the Parsha. And he told me, and I asked a few questions. And at the end I said, hey, can you make a joke about ass, because donkey and ass, and that would be funny. And so he said great, and he made a little pun. And then I went home and I edited it together and made something that was about 3 minutes long, and then Nick animated it. And I called it Godcast because I thought that was funny and it rhymed with podcast, and went out and just started showing it to people. A big thing happened, which was I heard about this conference that was going to happen called ROI. It is now an annual event that happens in Jerusalem, put on by the Schusterman Foundation. But this was the first year that this happened. This was in 2006. And there was this call for innovative projects in Jewish life. Nick and I and Matthew Roth thought, wow, we should really get this piece together and bring it to the ROI conference, and maybe we can show it to Lynn Schusterman and whoever else is going to be there, and maybe we'll get funding for it. So this caused us to scramble and finish the piece up really quick, and we brought it to Jerusalem, and then the conference turned out to be not exactly what was promised. People didn't get to pitch their projects. Only 3 people got to pitch their projects, and I remember this very vividly, that I was fortunate enough that I got to pitch Godcast to the room. I got up in front of a room of 150 people and showed my Godcast episode and got a standing ovation. People just thought it was so exciting. And there's kind of 2 creation myths here, right? There's that story. There's another story I could tell you that kind of predates this if you're interested.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So another story is that Matthew Roth and Matthew is a writer who is currently in Brooklyn. Matthew and I are good old friends who, have hung out around Jewish creativity for a long time together. And he and I were hanging out in my living room, and he happened to mention to me, the big Siyum on Shas is happening right now in New York. And I was like, who's he on what's he? And he's like, oh, there's this thing, Daf Yomi. It happens every 7.5 years. People study a page of Talmud a day, And if you do that, and the whole world does it in sync, it takes 7.5 years to do. And tonight is the end of that cycle. And there's this huge thing with tens of thousands of people all over the world and at Madison Square Garden and whatever, who are having a big party that they finished learning Talmud together. And I thought that was so cool. And Matthew and I immediately decided, wow, we have to do this. Like, what does it start again tomorrow? He was like, yeah. We were like, we should do it. We should learn the daf, the page of Talmud tomorrow. That would be so cool. And we didn't really know how to do it. We were both kind of new to this. And we immediately, as we were wont to do, got on the internet and kind of looked up, learn Daf Yomi, podcast, Daf Yomi, whatever. And we found, like after a lot of work, right, we found some guy with a heavy Yiddish accent and a terrible recording in a basement somewhere in Long Island, like who knows. And we listened to it, and it was about, it was about Brachot 2a, which is the first page of what's traditionally the first tractate in the cycle of learning Talmud. And we had no idea what he was talking about, right? It was, here we are on the first page, and we had no idea what he was talking about, partly because of his accent, but partly because he used all this jargon like, Tzeit HaKakavim. And we were like, what? And we had to hit pause and then Google that and try and sort out from his Ashkenazis, like, oh, Tzeit HaKokavim, like, oh, that means when you see 3 stars in the sky. Oh, this is a notion of halachic time. Oh, what's halachic time? And we went down this like insane rabbit hole of trying to understand this podcast about the page of Talmud. And we made it through our first page of Talmud together in this manner, and it took a long time. And at the end, the two of us were so excited and bouncing off the walls, and we said, what would be so cool would be like a podcast for Daf Yomi learners who are like us, who are excited but don't know anything, and whenever a word gets used that's jargony, we won't make people, Google it. We'll actually make a little animation. So it would be like, Tzeit HaKokavim, pause, and there would be a little animation that would show 3 stars in the sky, and then we would explain it, and then you would come back, and we were so excited about it. And I had this very important conversation with a professor of Talmud who's a dear friend of mine, Tzvi Septimus, and Tzvi said, Sarah, you guys, you don't even know what you don't know. Go animate the Torah. Why don't you do a nice little Parsha HaShavua, Torah portion of the week series, and figure out what you're doing, and think about Talmud when you grow up a little bit. And this kind of dismissive jab from Tzvi turns out to be one of the most important things anyone has ever said to me. Because first of all, we did go do that, and it took off, and it changed all of our lives. And second of all, because it was through the process of actually animating all of these Torah portions that I really learned them all. And that is such a deep and profound thing. I think it's the biggest thing I've learned through the last 10 years of this work, is that it is through not just reading the text, and not just reading the text in Chavruta, but through actually, Chavruta is the buddy system of learning in traditional Judaism, but through actually making something from each piece of text, you have to make your own meaning, right? For some people, it's writing a blog. For some people, it's keeping a podcast. For me, it was producing these animated films with other folks. This was very collaborative, that I actually learned the stuff.
Wow. You've said a few things that touch on themes that we've talked about. One is that you grew up without a lot of Jewish knowledge, and we've talked about what we call our knowledge versus chutzpah curve. I don't know if you listened to that one of our episodes, but we've talked about how actually, as much as the intuition tells us that more Jewish knowledge equates with a better ability to craft inspiring new Jewish things, it might actually be that in certain cases, having less of that knowledge and less, more importantly, of a need to stay true to what was original or what was the past might actually correlate with people innovating new things. So I'm curious and really intrigued that you came to this without that much Jewish knowledge. I was very, very similar. I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which has a solid Jewish community, but similar to you, I had all the heart and hand, to use your language, but not much of the head. And I think that helped me. I'm curious if whether it's being from South Carolina, whether it's just coming to this with an open mind and not having that knowledge, if you think that sort of played into your willingness to enter into this whole new world of Jewish text in the way that you did.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing question. I think that's true. I just being open and reflective for a minute, the more that I know, in fact, the less willing I am to get into dialogue with people. I think I'm quieter in these situations because the more I know, the more worried I am about the more that I don't know. You know what I mean? I just had an interesting miniature conversation on Facebook with the aforementioned Andy Shapiro-Katz, where he was noticing how many people like his heavy-duty academic-y posts without commenting, and he was wondering why that is. And an interesting thread ensued about how many of us are intimidated by high-level discourse, especially between academics and rabbis, and we will drop out of the conversation. So the less I knew, the more willing I was to go out and say something creative or different or wacky.
Right. So you spoke about something that's so important, this intimidation factor of conversations. And the Facebook point is really important because I've had similar things. I'll notice that friends of mine that many people might think of as unaffiliated, disaffiliated, uninterested in their Jewish identity, whatever, are among the folks that most frequently are liking random things I post about, whether it's Jewish holidays or historical things, whatever I'm, rambling about in my latest post. But what's so special about the internet and what BimBam does is people can be intimidated in sort of the privacy of their own home. If you're intimidated by a conversation, like you said, in an Upper West Side Shabbat lunch or whatever it might be, you sitting in that conversation, it can be obvious or feel obvious that, I'm behind the eight ball and I know less than everybody in this room. I'm not saying anything. Everybody else has their interesting thoughts about this week's Torah portion. If you can go online and watch a video, nobody sees you do that. So that, oh gosh, I didn't know, how stupid must I look right now, is gone. And that's why I think that services like BimBam are so crucial. I bring that up because, that intimidation factor that you talk about is so big, and everybody seems to think they're the only one. So first off, to folks who might be listening, you're not. I was in that space only a few years ago, and just for whatever reason decided to go on a mission to learn more. Not every, I don't see that as good or bad. I just wanted to for some reason. But can you speak a little bit to some of the benefits you've seen unique to the internet that BimBam can bring to light?
Well, one thing that's really worth bringing up is that there's two kinds of distribution factors or models at play here that you should notice. I guess you could call them push and pull, right? Here's a good example. I got invited to a Shiva. Somebody died. I heard about a Shiva. I am completely mortified because I've never been to one. I have no idea what to expect. The stakes could not possibly be higher for me to look like an idiot and hurt someone's feelings. So, I can either stay away, which is how many people are going to choose, or I can dig in and learn something, right? So people at a certain age don't have a rabbi they're going to call and ask for advice. They're going to go online, right? And there's a whole ecosystem of websites and podcasts and videos that support this at that point. If you go onto YouTube, which is our world, and you search for Shiva, first of all, you're going to get a lot of videos of Hindu gods, which is awesome. But when you then revise your search to say Jewish Shiva, you're mostly going to get a lot of videos of men with beards telling you how things work in Yiddish accents, right? And then you'll find our video. BimBam made a video, what to expect at a Shiva, or how to support your friend in mourning. We actually have a series of 4 videos about Jewish death, burial, and mourning rituals and customs. And it is such a great way to, in 10 minutes of your own time, figure out the basics and feel totally confident, as we say, to walk into a Shiva, a Seder, or a synagogue for the first time. knowing the basics and feeling okay being a beginner. So we're there with a non-judgmental, non-agenda-driven, fairly light approach to these topics, and for something you are searching for. Now, the other type of distribution, apart from search, people looking for answers to questions, is the push stuff. So if you do affiliate in some way with a synagogue or a Moishe house or a JCC, preschool, what have you, different institutions choose to push out certain content of ours. So, for instance, there are chaplains in the hospice world who will send out our same kind of mourning and grieving videos to their families. There are folks in the synagogue world that specifically send out our traditions of a baby naming or a bris videos when applicable. And so there are institutions using us as a friendly resource to support their work. And also, we're kind of rock stars in the congregational education world because religious school teachers use the Parsha HaShavua videos, the Torah portion videos in Sunday school classrooms, and kids love them. So that's the kind of institutional push, and then there's the YouTube search, and those are two different ways that the stuff gets out there. And the internet gives us the affordance of working both ways.
Are there any other kinds of folks that we wouldn't have thought of that you've been in touch with that accessed your videos somehow that gained something special from it?
A really important audience is interfaith families or interfaith couples that are dating, right, where one person is Jewish and the other one isn't, but wants to be part of a Jewish conversation, right? Maybe the couple has decided to raise Jewish kids or raise the children in two faiths, whatever. The point is there's a non-Jewish person who wants to be a full part of their partner's life. And so they watch our stuff to see, wait, what is a bar mitzvah? Wait, what is a seder? And by the same token, prospective converts are an important audience. They are checking out Jewish ideas. They are on a Jewish learning adventure. One of my favorite stories is from this woman who she's in a long process of converting. And she said, well, I'm thinking about converting. I have been for a long time. I go to synagogue every Shabbat morning, and we have kind of an interactive sermon, and the rabbi will often pose questions, and my hand kind of always shoots up in the air, and my friends tease me like, Alicia, how do you know so much Torah? You're not even Jewish. And she says, don't you guys know about Godcast? And that's when I realized that, your videos were my Jewish education, or were the foundation of my Jewish education. And that's where I got all my building blocks from. And I wanted to say thank you.
I'm curious how you think about this Jewish time in which we live and where all kinds of things are going and what, from a practical standpoint, new media or the internet, what role it can play in this story of our time, or, metaphorically, whether this work has given you a lens through which to look at the evolution of Judaism in our time and comparing it to the internet or new media. Lex and I have been trying to play around with some of those ideas lately, and you're definitely somebody who's thinking about these analogies all the time. So I'm just curious if you have some perspectives to contribute.
Yeah, this is a great topic that's in a lot of flux all the time, right? Like, I just had a conversation this morning with Jeremy, our animation director. We're working on a video about kashrut, about what is kosher and how to do it and why to do it. And as you might imagine, this is a thorny topic. And it reminded me of a terrific lecture that Dina Aronoff gave a month ago. She's a faculty member at the Graduate Theological Union here in Berkeley. She was talking about how it used to be that women were the masters of kashrut in their own kitchens, that they had it received from their mothers who had it received from their mothers, and they knew how to, for instance, kosher an oven for Passover, or they knew how to, get rid of the chametz. They knew what they were doing, and in fact, if you had a question about kashrut, you would just ask the woman of the house. And there is a move these days that I'm sure you're familiar with, where we don't trust anyone. God forbid we trust our neighbor, but we don't even trust ourselves. and we go right to the internet and we want to see a source, or we go to Facebook and we ask for a source, or we go to a rabbi and we want them to show us a source, and there is a re-privileging of the text above the person and the tradition because internet, right? Because it is at our fingertips to Google whatever we want and to have it in a split second, and to find in the great echo chamber voices that say what perhaps unconsciously we want them to say or what our neuroses need to hear, we go with increasingly stricter or more arcane or skinnier, deeper rabbit holes around any given topic rather than trust the people around us in our homes or in our communities. And I see the internet doing this to us, putting us into deeper and deeper, narrower and narrower pockets. Now, I think whoever has the loudest, flashiest, most exciting voice might dig a wider, deeper hole, right? We're seeing that in American politics right now. We see that everywhere, that the internet can put us all into pockets of one, or really loud, well-promoted, great SEO websites can put us into slightly larger pockets. But it's a different type of intelligence and a different kind of thinking that pulls people together online than that pulls people together in real, meat space communities. And this gives me a lot of pause. There's a lot more privileging of presentation than there is of content. This is not a new insight, but I think it's, for me, right, as a relatively less observant Jew, it's troubling to me when I see friends of mine kind of coming from the same place, going into these more and more arcane pockets, and I'm pretty sure it's the internet driving it, not their, neighborhood rabbi.
That's so interesting because, your impulse would be to think of or at least my impulse would be to think of the internet as something that makes so many different things available and therefore blows open the possibilities of the way that people can think about things. And that's what I would want it to be.
It does blow it open, and that has its positive and its negative sides, right? Like, how exciting that more and more people, can watch our videos, can listen to your podcast, can read articles on this and that website, and be engaged and learn more and start a journey. That's awesome. But it also is happening in, a million vacuums, that you and I are both going down our own rabbit holes separately rather than sitting in some adult ed class together. And I'm not going to make the argument that we should get rid of the internet and go back to, only real world experiences, but it's going to create a very different community when everyone in it grows up in these separate little learning chambers.
What I would ask, though, is whether, what about the people who, don't really connect to, capital T, capital C, the community, in real space. And the question then becomes, right, how can the internet be a tool that can be used to connect those people to the Jewish stuff? Right. I mean, like in the example that you gave, I sort of think of it as, there's the downside of not trusting, your mother about how she did kosher, but instead going to the internet. But the upside is if you didn't like the way your mother did it, you can find out that there are more options than you might have known about. But I see that there's those two poles are difficult, right? I mean, it's not all positive, and I think you're right to be pointing that out. And so, the question in a way becomes, what is a vision in which a larger number of Jews could actually become more excited about Judaism and more knowledgeable through the kind of tools like BimBam that we have, without making an unhealthy separation off into these
right. Pockets. It can be enormously positive, and we can look to other subcultural or subgroups of the greater culture to see examples of that, right? Like, thank God for the internet in the LGBT community, right? Thank God that millions of people, teenagers living in South Carolina, can read up on, I think I might be gay. What does that mean? Is there community out there for me? Are my thoughts wrong? Am I a sinner? And can have community apart from the one they happen to have been born into, right? So to find other contexts for yourself in that way is literally life-saving, right? It's so very important. And, we've seen in just the last 20 years unbelievable strides for the entire LGBT community, perhaps because it's better able to connect to itself and to message outwards using the internet. And therefore, as a community, has been able to make huge achievements in the culture at large, right? What if it operated the same way in the Jewish community? Could it? Could we all get more connected, learn more, and be more collectively empowered? Oh, I hope so. Unfortunately, I see a lot of sniping and whining on the internet between us. But I have to look at other communities and think, could this be a vehicle for our collective empowerment also?
So I certainly share that question, and my answer, and I'm biased because I think of my own situation and I privilege it, but I'm somebody who honestly, if I were to measure my time, if I were to log my time that I spend doing Jewish things, I think substantially more of it is spent with a computer screen in front of me than a synagogue building or a local communal space. And I see that neither is good nor bad. I see that as just what I do. And more than that, I see it as what a lot of people, especially my age, but even older than me, are doing. I've met people, who are living in Alaska or who are living in Mississippi, maybe South Carolina, as you mentioned, there's one community nearby, maybe, that sort of like what you said, probably not a lot of people around their age in the room. And so the internet becomes some sort of community. Maybe we're not ready to say it is a real community yet. We'll see. But I think of all of the amazing places we've gone with social media and the vast variety of simply Facebook groups. I could go, I realized for a while, because I looked at my Facebook groups, I was in one Jewish Facebook group catered towards modern Orthodox people with a progressive political tint. I was in another Facebook group for non-Orthodox people who are LGBTQ or allies. I was in another one for Jewish educators. It's ridiculous and awesome how specialized and specific we've made these different things. Also, by the way, I think BimBam is a huge part of this. You mentioned interfaith, interethnic, whatever kinds of people. Not only is that true, and I can say that from personal experience too. My fiance and I, for listeners, I've referenced my girlfriend in the past. We're now fiance.
Oh, mazel tov.
Thank you. But we, on Shavuot, that was our up all night Shavuot experience. We did Shavuot Unbound through Judaism Unbound that many of our listeners probably participated in. But the one that Valerie and I chose was to do these BimBam videos, and we watched. It only took about, I think, 4.5, 5 hours only. But when you're up all night, that's not so much. And we watched our way through, and really, I walked away and I felt sort of like what you said with your feeling creating the videos. Wow. I feel right now sort of more on top of, in touch with, deeply connected to this text.
That's so cool. Only a few people that I'm aware of have watched the whole Torah series. I sat with someone and did it once. It's intense. It was hard for me. Those videos are almost 10 years old, and they were made on a shoestring budget. It's hard for me to watch them because we're so much, quote unquote, better now. But, what's so incredible about them that I'm still so proud of, and I hope this came through also, is that, we've doubled a few of them. So there's 65 of these things, and that means there are 65 different speakers in them who are artists and poets and rabbis and Jewish educators and environmentalists and all kinds of things. And you get to taste 65 different people's Torah. And it's so cool. I had never read anything of Dara Horn's before she did an episode for us, and now I've read one of her novels. How great. I got introduced to her. I got to meet Joseph Telushkin, and now I get him when I look at, one of his books, Jewish Literacy, et cetera. So I hope you got a taste of the diversity of Jewish thought out there also.
For sure, without it, and not only, I mean, it's the diversity of Jewish thought. And for those who are curious about these videos, you do an incredible job. Sort of, some of them are song based, some of them are stories, some of them are young voices, some of them are older voices. Just a huge variety of styles. Really, I mean, they're all animated and they're all, I guess, 3 to 5 minutes or so. But the variety is incredible.
Sarah, as we come towards the close of this episode, I just wanted to see if you could tell us just in a few words about your newest project, Shaboom, and what we should be looking for as it unfolds.
Sure. I'll just say that when I started BimBam 10 years ago, I was a single young adult who really cared about Jewish learning, and I was making something that was very much for myself and my peers. You know, kind of a serious but also a little bit funny introduction to Jewish texts. These days, I have a 6 and a 3-year-old, and I'm married, and we're raising these little rambunctious, adorable people together. And so I really care about teaching kids, right? It's not just about adults for me anymore. I'm really interested in early childhood education. And so I spent some time looking at the research on educational media for kids and thinking about what could we do for kids here at BimBam. And long story short, the answer is a show we launched a couple months ago called Shaboom. It is an animated series for kids roughly 4 to 7, and it's about everyday Jewish values like gratitude, generosity, visiting the sick. I think what's most interesting to me about the process of coming up with this show, Shaboom, was speaking with dozens and dozens of parents and grandparents of young children and hearing this frustration around what everyone wants to give us all the time is Shabbat and holidays. And you know what? I am not going to start lighting Shabbat candles, and we are not going to start keeping kosher. And can't you just give us something that's about raising great children, courageous children, kind children? And that became the basis for this show, and looking at general social emotional curricula in early childhood and thinking how might we graft Jewish on top of that, which turns out to be very easy. And we have, many parallel deep traditions in Judaism about talking about character or midot, and we're taking a stab at it one episode at a time, and that's very fulfilling work for us right now.
Well, it'll be exciting to find out more about it as it goes on. And so just thank you so much for being with us. We were really excited to have you on, and I feel like we're coming full circle since we were together at our mutual beginnings.
It's really, really cool. I'm really glad you brought that up. And I have to say, I'm really glad that after 9.5 years of having an organization called Godcast, I'm thrilled to be finally on a podcast. So thank you for that.
We're always happy to take dreams and make them come true. So we're glad that was able to happen. First podcast for the founder of Godcast. Love it. Now BimBam. We just want to, as always, close out our episode by letting you know how you can be in touch with us, the Judaism Unbound folks. And the first way is that you can send us a note on our Facebook page or just comment, like, etc. That's just called Judaism Unbound. Next up, you can go to our website, judaismunbound.com. And last but not least, you can always hit us up via email at dan@nextjewishfuture.org and at lex@nextjewishfuture.org. So thanks for listening. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.